Good morning, my beautiful lovelies. Grand Rising. Welcome. This is the Parinama practice space where we are building a regular practice for uniting our reflexes, our emotion, and our cognition. And today's topic is nervous system regulation. Good morning. I think we had a little glitch on the live, so I'm going to start from the top. Good morning. Welcome. This is the Parinama practice space, and we are building a regular practice to unite reflex, emotion, and logic. I'm Katie Bickford. I used to build teams previously. I built teams as an executive all over the world, and now I am the author, the co-creator and founder of Parinama Method. And today's topic, we're going to get into, I'm just going to look here because it seems like there's just something wrong. And I just want to make sure it's working. I don't know if you can see the video. So that's kind of a question for the ages, but I'm just going to keep going here. So today's topic is nervous system regulation. And before we get into it, let's just take a breath together and just a friendly reminder that on the inhale, so inhale, that's energy giving, and an exhale is relaxing and restoration. So when we inhale, we activate the sympathetic nervous system, which is energizing in the fight or flight. And when we exhale, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and restoration. So just using the breath throughout the day accordingly. So emphasizing if you're tired to take bigger breaths. And if you need to relax and reduce some anxiety, using the breath as a tool. Also, let's just check in for a moment, do the 1 through 10, where we look at how we feel physically, how we feel emotionally, and how we feel mentally on a scale of 1 to 10. So physically, just check in and notice whether, give yourself a number on a scale of 1 to 10. And I want to just give a little bit of a story time on this, which is that for a few days, I felt very tens across the board. And this is how I use this in a practical, everyday way, is that it's just to really develop my relationship with myself and to be able to manage myself. And we'll talk about nervous system regulation today, which lends itself to this without a doubt. But so it's like physically right now, I'm probably an 8. I just spent some time releasing some tension in my neck and my shoulders, which has kind of actually made my face really hot. And emotions, so how do I feel emotionally on a scale of 1 to 10? I'm actually probably also an 8. And so yesterday, after a long day of doing a lot of creative work, at about 6:30, I bonked and I felt like a 5 across the board. And I felt physically, I was hungry, and my body felt like just really logy and low energy, and it felt it felt uncomfortable to be in it. Emotionally, I felt all of a sudden this dip in my sense of optimism about what's possible. And mentally, I didn't feel like I could really, I had some more work I still had to do. And so the 5 was maybe a 4 because I didn't, I still had stuff to prepare for this that I hadn't done yet. And I felt really like I couldn't take it on. So it's just amount of energy, and can I take on new stuff, and just sort of an overall, sensibility. So just giving that as an example. And so when I was there, when I'm at, 5s across the board, instead of pushing against them, I immediately, I think I'm like, well, I've been 10s and 9s very recently. So what I need is to just nurture myself right now. So, so I ate, took a nap, watched a little TV, and then I worked on what I'm about to show you. So, the topic today is a continuation. So here we are. I'm eights. Wherever you are is where you are, and that just gives you a point to just accept yourself and hopefully be able to adjust accordingly, or yeah, or just be patient with the state that you're in. So sometimes it isn't a matter of actually doing anything to adjust. It's just checking in, being like, this is where I'm at. So this series, this There's Nothing Wrong with You series, we previously talked about the so-called shadows. Today we talk about nervous system regulation. The point of all of these topics, where they exist in the sequence that I'm following here, is there's nothing wrong with you is all about talking on aspects of ourself that are just natural, like aspects of being a human being that somehow get like shame is applied to them. And we're going to talk a bit more on that today, which actually exacerbates. So the idea of the shadows is previously discussed, that like fear, guilt, shame, anger, all of these things are naturally arising but become chronic, and then we start to have this thing that's like, if people knew who I really am, then my whole world would come crashing down. So that's one thing that's very common across the board in terms of the discussion of all these things, is that the expression of these things when they're pushed to their limits, which happen very naturally just through natural occurrences of being alive and operating a daily life, that we have a thing that's like, well, if somebody saw me at this point, if somebody saw me at my most fearful, if somebody saw me at my most angry, if somebody saw me when I was maxed out, my nervous system was fried, and they saw the thoughts that were in my head, if they saw that, then they would know what and who I really am. There's this part of me that's this dark thing that just like cannot be known. And because it can't be known, it is this secret that's carried around that's like, well, my true nature actually is this. And, and a little story time on this. This is super common where people like this phenomenon, which is that people will, and I'll use Parinama practitioners, will talk about having felt, throughout the day, they're like, I did my practice, I was doing great, I felt really elevated, I felt pretty benevolent in general. And ultimately, sort of maybe at the end of the day, and this is like the thing that's unfortunate, is that we give the people we love the end of our day, that, it's like I was on this, so one example is someone had said, like, I was on the subway and all of a sudden I felt a lot of aggravation about the people around me. And so I felt like I was starting to feel aggressive about people being in my space. And the thoughts I started having were, kind of were aggressive, even sort of like fantastical violence. And they thought, gosh, what's that? I thought I was doing so great. I thought I'd done a great job with this. And so we talked about what we're going to talk about today. So let's start. There are visual aids, and let's see if there's room for all of us here. I don't think there is. So let's see. Is there room for all three of us? The microphone. It's like I'm peeking out. Hi. So I'm gonna pull this out full screen. So everyone has an energetic emotional budget. And when we're operating within the budget, it's like you feel like you can deal with whatever's happening in your life. You might feel stress or pressure, but it doesn't really bother you that much. So, an example of this, like, this is the ideal place to be. An example of this would be if, say, something, you're in the kitchen and you're cooking, and, you spill something, and you're like, and clean it up. And then under other conditions, you spill something and you have a meltdown. This is the difference between this. Like, so this is when you've overspent your budget, but it's like, so when we're talking about what the ideal, when we know we're still spending our emotional and energetic budget, we're in what is actually what we have, is that just we can things are just really manageable. And so this is the ideal place to be. And we're going to talk more about how do you expand the budget and how to even create awareness. And we're going to do a little exercise at the end of this. But this is when we feel like we're a good person. And this is why this topic is parinama, is that when our nervous system is regulated and when we're within our budget, there's this notion of like, oh, that's a good person, a good person. But the thing is, in one day, the good person who is operating within budget can overspend, and then in a different circumstance at a different time in the same 12-hour period can present very differently as a so-called bad person. So let's talk about it. Here we go. So when we overspend, we start to get easily frustrated. We naturally get drained, tired, hungry, sick, depending on what we're exposed to. And even if you do everything perfectly, you're doing, I used to do, hours of yoga a day and eat, the perfect diet and meditate and do everything that is like, what I'd say is like the shame complex of the stuff you're not doing enough of. When I was actually doing it as a consistent daily practice, a day in the world still drains you. So when we have like, when basically the thing, when people are invading our space, when people are, listening takes energy, um, caring about people, actions, doing things takes energy, having emotions takes energy. So whatever we started the day with just immediately starts swiping that card and immediately starts to get spent. And so we just naturally, it's just no matter what, if you are a human being, this budget just gets spent. It starts to drain, and there are actions that we'll talk about that have to do with how do you replenish it. But that's not really our point right now. The larger point right now is just, to me, a win in this session is just a little bit of recognition and giving yourself a break about this. um, so to me, a win would be that if you are frustrated or find yourself in a state where you're, not your best, that you can contextualize it a bit more and give yourself some really constructive compassion on it. So, as we begin to overspend, there are two directions: hypoarousal and hyper arousal. And let's talk about it. So one of the things is when we get overspent, we can either get openly agitated. So the directionality that this goes in is either open agitation, starting to be like snap at people and be short with people, and we'll look a little bit like agitated, increasing anxiety, or the other is beginning to disconnect. And the important thing about this is talking about how dissociative behaviors is also a sign of having overspent your nervous system budget. So there's the two directions. And I think the hypoarousal, which is starting to become spacier, um, and the concentration is lower, the energy is lower, is probably the side of nervous system regulation that is not commonly appreciated. I think people can understand that folks who tend to get angry and nasty and, kind of, and aggressive, like it's like, oh yeah, they've had it. But there's also the thing of just being like, I can't take it anymore, and becoming really spacey and dissociative. So that's also a thing that we do. I want to show you this slide because I love that the fuzzy arrows. So when we start to, so this begins, so we start, so if we're starting from the place of being regulated, and it's like we like kind of handle whatever's coming our way, and then dysregulation starts. So we start to get a little agitated, or we begin to disconnect. And the thing that happens next is that once we're overspent, so that when the dysregulation starts, can start to, and if we're aware of it, we can, if, and we give ourselves a break about it, instead of feeling ashamed about it or suppressing it or not wanting to like really acknowledge it. The thing that happens is it just can accelerate. So this is where the shaming or thinking there's something wrong with you, the strategy for that is usually to become either defensive about it. Defensive is probably a good way, or denial, like where it's, it's just kind of like, oh, look, all of a sudden I'm behaving this way, which, both are sort of, understandable. But the thing is, like, once we start to feel that the agitation is starting to build, once we start to really tune ourselves to having awareness around this, that you feel the agitation or you feel yourself beginning to disconnect, is knowing what's happening. So it's like, oh, here, this is, I'm overspent right now. So in an ideal world, this is where we can do things in our practice that support bringing ourselves back to regulation. We're going to do a little exercise. Everything that we're going to do in these sessions is the shorter exercises that are, one of the things would be like checking in with yourself, doing some breathing, and then we're going to do some tapping. Tapping is a good way to kind of just give yourself a little time to kind of to tune back in. But here we're looking at, so this is what happens when, so it's like we're at, so you begin to become dysregulated. And then once we pass that threshold and we're overspent, our responses are not something we choose. These are reflexive reactions that just take over. And this is going back to what we talked about at the top of this, which is, if people really knew who I am, then they would be, like, or if the world knew, or there's a secret about how I behave that can't be known. This internalization of, like, if people knew what I did yesterday, I like screamed at a customer service representative, or I was, like, whatever. I'm trying to think of some examples. Like, it's like, it's really, they're all natural. If you want to share some, please drop them in the chat or share them. Parinama IG, DM me if you wanted. These examples, shed light on them, take them out of the shadow of shame. But once these behaviors start to arise, it's understanding that our nervous system has left the place of having enough energy to operate it with consciousness, and now we've moved into reflex. And this is another thing where we're getting into parinama, where we do the reflex, emotion, and logic, because we're addressing this in a number of different directionalities. And so one of them is understanding what our reflexes are, and we work with those throughout the practice and the process of parinama, which we'll get into sequentially as we keep going in this practice. But also just understanding that these are very deep patternings that were put into place. There are proclivities to our behavior when we are overspent, are the arising of some of this like unresolved patterning that we shed light and consciousness onto as we practice parinama. And in doing that, we develop a sense of accountability with ourselves, but also just, it's a shameless accountability where you just see it and you go, oh, and you look at it as it's the behavior of somebody that you love deeply and unconditionally. So being hyperactivated, anxious, angry, out of control, overwhelmed. And being, hypoactivated is spacey, zoned out, numb, and frozen. And when we're in these patterns, there's this kind of floating notion of like, well, this is ultimately who I become. This is ultimately my true nature being revealed. And I am here to emphatically make a case for the fact that that is not a reflection of your true nature. It's a reflection of an aspect of your nature that was formed before you had the capability to have any context or say in it. So with Parinama, what we do is we start working with that. And once again, I'm just going to go back to the tangle really quickly, and then we're going to talk about regulating. So, and once again, the forming of these reflexes is that our early circumstances and experiences shape our reflexes. And then our reflexes, we begin to create belief systems to rationalize them. Even though they arise in a different aspect of our neurology than our cognitive thought. But we apply cognitive thought to the reflexes to just make sense of them because they don't make logical sense, quite frankly. And that forms what we think is reality. And then what we perceive to be reality is projected out into the world. We project that, and then the world responds accordingly. So that just strengthens our notion of what reality is, and it tightens this tangle where these reflexes are actually malleable. So these reflexes and these belief systems, we can work with them when we lower the intensity of the amount of shame, I would say, is one thing. And shame is a big part of it, but it's also certainty. So certainty being the shadow of the seventh hub of our cognition. So being certain that this is just how it is, and having that be fixed, and being unwilling to change your perception, your mind about something. So the reason I'm just spending a little time on that is just to re-emphasize that these reflexes that have to do with becoming overspent are deeply coded within us. So when we're working in our Parinama practice, what we're doing is we are working through we're working through creating a better relationship with ourselves and understanding these aspects of ourselves. And as a result of it, being able to take a deeper level of accountability, but also to just disintegrate and loosen these kind of calcified patterns. And you're never too old to do this, but I will say that the longer that we spend continuing that cycle and tightening that tangle, the more convinced we are. So if you can, so age has nothing to do with it. It's actually how you can become malleable in your certainty, I think, might be also something to do with it. So let's talk just a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about how we manage the budget, and then we're going to do an exercise, and then we are going to wrap it up for today. So how we manage the budget. So first and foremost is awareness. So knowing that you do not have unlimited mental and emotional budget. So this is something, this is at the core of realizing that this is actually like something that we're operating within. And to also just give yourself a break is that, because so I think like if you really, shame has a way of sort of being able to be like, yeah, but, and the thing is that there's just nobody who has an absolutely unlimited budget that just constantly allows them to spend. Or maybe there's somebody, I haven't met them yet, I'm unaware of this person's existence. So how do you manage the budget? One of them is containing your spending and boundaries. And in the Parinama book, there's let me find the page here. I think it's in the we look at the different boundaries. So that's page 25. And so it's upholding boundaries so you don't have seepage. And so this has to do with being just aware that spending happens. And some of the things that are surprising is like loud sounds that are unpleasant, or even seeing things that are just really activating and confronting. So seeing things in the news, or seeing, having strong emotions. So you might have an aversion to having a really intense conversation with somebody, and might think like, oh, that's something that is like wrong with me. Whereas that's actually it might be a protection around the level of, a capacity, but also expenditure. So boundaries. So emotional boundaries, physical boundaries. We like there. That's a whole. We could go deeper into that. Making more is another way to manage the budget, and that's expanding capacity, which is doing the things that restore you. And there's and this is a whole other topic that will continue to be revisited throughout Parinama method. But these are the things, like sleep, food that makes your body feel good, time with people that, make you feel validated and great. The list goes on, but the things that actually make you feel good and soothe you, restore you, and give you energy, and balancing debits and credits. We won't talk about that today. It's a little too complicated, but that's the charge and discharge. That is like releasing energy and also building energy. And then and discharge is probably like charging is like the make more part. Discharging is the practices that we go by Hub, which are about releasing sort of stuck tensions that exist in the different parts of our body and the different parts of our nervous system. So all right, so let's get into it. Let's talk about an exercise. Hooray. So this is an exercise if you are in the book, and I want to be mindful of time, but so we're looking at the points here where there are 9 points. And so, and I've just have left us with like almost no time to do this. So I'm going to try to give a 2-minute like super session here, because this is actually probably one of the more important parts of this, is that the first thing that we're doing is we're drawing our senses inward, and we're bringing our attention to physical or emotional feelings that are creating like drain, distress, discomfort. And what we're looking at is, and so you look at that. So if you have a headache, if you're upset about something, is, writing down, it's like trying to find it in your body. Find the location, like describe it a little bit, and give it a number of 1 to 10 in terms of its intensity. Now, either, in an upright position, or you can lie down, take a breath. And for physical discomfort, this is the mantra on this. And this is extraordinarily important, because even if you just say this, it can support a shift, which is, even though I have discomfort and pain in my neck, I deeply and completely accept myself. Even though I have discomfort in I deeply and completely accept myself. And for emotional discomfort and pain is, even though I am feeling angry, even though I'm feeling distressed, even though I'm feeling depressed, even though I'm feeling anxious, fill it in. Even though I'm feeling, I deeply and completely accept myself. So I'll use the example that at the top of the practice, which is that I have some tension in my neck. So where we begin, so you take 2 fingers, and I'm putting this up here. We've shared some room here. So you start with the sides of your hands, and this is something that you can do really low key if you don't want to do all of the tapping locations. And we're probably going to go about like 2 minutes over to 8, so 8:32. 8:33, so just letting you know on time. So this is something that you can actually do kind of anywhere. So just the side, it's called the karate chop. They kind of call this location. So you take two fingers and you tap and you say, yeah, and so we say the mantra. So even though, I want to say the exact words here. Even though I have discomfort and pain in my shoulders. So now, and so by the way, going back, I would say that my discomfort is now down to about a 3, but let's just work with 3 for this case. I already did some work on it before we started. So, but even though I have pain and discomfort in my shoulders, I deeply and completely accept myself. So even though I have pain and discomfort, put in your location, I deeply and completely accept myself. And now the other locations, we move to the outside of the eyes. So even though I have pain and discomfort, fill in your location, I deeply and completely accept myself. Feels kind of nice right there. And now on the mounds of the cheeks, and all these locations are in the book. It's on page 110. So even though I have pain and discomfort, fill in your location. I deeply and completely accept myself. And now under the nose, the Cupid's bow, right here. So even though I have pain and discomfort I deeply and completely accept myself. And next we move down to under the chin, under your lips. So even though I have pain and discomfort, give yourself the location. I deeply and completely accept myself. And now on the sternum here. And this is where you do this little chef's kiss thing. So even though I have pain and discomfort I deeply and completely accept myself. And the next is, so you keep the chef's kiss and tap the sides of your body. So it's beneath your armpits here. So even though, tap, 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 even though I have pain and discomfort, I accept myself deeply and completely. And now next on the top of the head, back to just a couple of fingers, even though I have pain and discomfort, I deeply and completely accept myself. And last and not least is between the eyes, even though I have discomfort and pain I deeply and completely accept myself. So that is tapping. We just tap together. All right. So the takeaway, and let me know how I'm doing with convincing you, is that there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. Please believe me. Please believe me. Tomorrow's session is going to be a special birthday session where I am going to do a gratitude and generosity practice. And please tune in for that. I would love to see you there. And so my recommendation, I'll say before we sign off, my recommendation is Chris and T music. If you are looking for something to be a positive activating, energizing. It's Kristen T music or Peachka music, and, you can either I think it's streaming on all platforms. If you want, more details, just, ask in the chat, but that is it for today. So thank you so much for joining, and I am looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye for now.